Welcome to Amateur Hour CX, a podcast on the state of cycling from our point of view in the grassroots ranks, or pretty much whatever strikes Eric's fancy based on who he could trick to come on the show today. I'm Mark Walling, and here's your host, Eric Schillinger.
This is why we're having this conversation, actually, because, you know, you're basically never allowed to un-Nycross yourself.
No, I'm an honorary member for life as far as I understand it.
It's not honorary. You're a member.
You guys are probably one of the few teams that I know that actually puts on like a full series. You know, most teams just do a race here and there. It's pretty decent.
It's funny that you say that because we're trying to figure out what we're going to do for this upcoming season, and I have to cajole all the promoters to you know, do the series every year. It's like, come on, guys, this is like the one thing that we do. You have to do it, otherwise there's just no point.
I'm sure it'll happen. It's March. People are thinking about other things.
Oh yeah, it'll definitely happen. So after we did the one that we did a couple weeks ago with Nathaniel, he pointed out to me that he knew certain things and I was incorrect about them, but he didn't want to correct me because he thought it would be awkward. And I told him, so I'm sort of saying this to just recount it because it's funny, but also it's like, you can take this advice. Like if I say something and it's obviously asinine, tell me. We told a story about one of the old CBRC guys racing some like post-Philly race and Jens Voigt being in the race and dusting everybody. And afterwards, I was reminded that it wasn't Jens Voigt, it was Hank Vogels, who is significantly further down the world of like famous pro racers. Hank Vogels, also pretty legit, Australian national champion, rode the tour a bunch of times, is a fast pro cyclist.
Yes, but he's not Jens Voigt.
But Jens Voigt is like obviously, I mean, he's probably like one of the 5 most famous random roadie cyclists, right? Like,
who's now a runner.
Yeah, is he a runner now? Well, he shut up, legs.
I mean,
so
I don't know. I don't know how you go from cycling to running. For me, the thing about running is like, I guess here's the thing. If I had to pick between riding the trainer and running, I would probably pick running just because like at least I'm outside and the scenery keeps changing. But like going from riding to running, you know, it's like the speed of the scenery gets a lot slower and then I get bored, you know. Basically I ride because I like need to not, you know, like I need to exercise, but it also has to be engaging enough where like I'm paying attention.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's something I always think is that part of the reason I go out, even when I was racing and training a lot and taking it seriously, most of it is just because like you see interesting things when you're out riding your road bike 50 miles straight, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a loop here in Philly that we, you know, actually it's funny. Tomorrow is the first official day of the ride. It's called the Dirty 30. It's like, you know, it starts around like 6:45 ish and just, you know, 30 miles nice and quick in the morning so people can still make it to the office by 9.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty hilly loop. And one of the second to last climb goes along this like wood fence. And it's like these thick square posts. And I swear to God, for the last year, on top of one of the posts, there's just been this purple vibrator and like sleet, snow, rain, like, you know, it's been a pretty bad winter. So it's like, it's been buried under snow for a while, but now it's like thawed out and it's still there. And now I'm just wondering how long it's actually been there because it's only been about a year that I've noticed it, but it's been there a year. So like, for all I know, it could have been there for, you know, this whole time.
These are the amazing wonders of road cycling. If there's not a reason to get, you know, a young kid into out riding a road bike that I could explain to a parent, I mean, this is it right here.
To
Parent,
discover purple vibrators.
Your junior should be out doing these group road rides with the adults because there's a potential that they'll come across sex toys, and we'll keep track of them if we do.
Well, to be fair, I have yet to actually point this out to anyone. You guys are the first people I'm telling this to.
We're breaking the story. The Dirty 30 purple vibrator is a thing. Here, so this will shock you, but I actually have like a mild idea of things I want to ask you, and mentioning Philly actually sort of is a perfect way to kind of bring that around
Segue.
because you live in Philly now, which has not always been the case, right? When I know, but tell our listeners who maybe don't know, when did you move to Philly?
It's been about 2 years, and I guess it's March. So I moved January 2 years ago. I pretty much, what was it? I waited until cross season was over and then moved in December 2 years ago.
And you moved from where?
I moved from Park Slope, New York.
The greatest city in the world.
Pretty much.
Where the hell is that?
Well, it's in Brooklyn. Sorry. I was in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. I lived in New York City.
Mark doesn't get out much.
No, it's New Jersey. It's fine. It's New Jersey.
Yeah. I basically I lived in the neighborhood where if you went to the bar at the wrong time, it would be full of screaming toddlers.
And that is a reason to move 4 hours south right there.
Yeah. It's not 4 hours. You can make it from my house in New York to actually I was in New York this past weekend to do a bike race, and we were at a bar in Park Slope that was full of toddlers. And I got in my car and I was home in less than 2 hours. It was like an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's way less far than I think it is.
Yeah, it's really not that bad.
So now you lived in Brooklyn, and when you lived in Brooklyn, you just one day were like, I guess I'm going to be a pro cyclocross racer. You're like, you know what? This sounds like a good thing to do.
No, what? All right.
There was some sort of arc of things transpiring, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to try and sum it up as succinctly as I can.
Let me say something that is like a question, but I want you to sum it up succinctly, but I don't want to forget my question either.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you think you are a pro cyclocross racer?
That's a good question.
You want to answer my first question first, or my second question first?
I'll answer your second question first, just because I don't know why. I think it'll be a shorter answer.
I do. I don't want you to think that I'm like asking that in a sneaky way or a snide way.
No, I don't. It's so here's the thing. Cyclocross is the cycling discipline which in my mind blurs the line between professional and amateur the most.
Yeah, this is exactly.
There's no UCI designated professional license for cyclocross. The closest we've come to designating a professional class in cyclocross has been like the Pro CX ranking. And when like you were top 25 in the Pro CX, you got a permanently assigned number, which they scrapped after a year because it was too annoying for all the promoters or something.
They only did that for one season, right?
Yeah. And it was like pointless because do you know Robert Marion, the guy with the beard?
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, for that season, he had his skin suit made with white space and numbers on the shoulders and like both sides of his back. And they still made him pin up numbers every time. And he was like, well, this is stupid.
That is stupid. So even if you have a permanent number and you display your permanent number, you still have to pin a number on over it.
Right. Anyway, and it really depends on what your definition of professional is, because if your definition of a professional cyclocross racer is that cyclocross is your primary like income, then there's really only maybe like 5 or 6, definitely less than 10 people in the United States that are professional cyclocross racers, men and women combined.
Yeah. I mean, you have guys like Powers and I mean, Hyde, yeah, right. And I mean, you can probably list off more people, but I can't like rip 10 people off the top of my head. Powers and Hyde. If you showed me, if I had a list of results open in front of me, I might be able to guess who was who. You know,
probably Katie Compton.
Katie Compton for sure.
Hopefully Ellen,
Caitlin Anthony, Ellen.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Kerry Werner, right? Kerry Werner's on the Kona team. I think he seems like he's a pretty pro he seems to fit the
he's
bill.
pro. I mean, he doesn't seem to be hard up for money, but I don't exactly know like what he's getting. Like I talked to Kerry, but I'm not going to ask him what his income is.
Yeah, and I should be sensitive to all of this. I don't mean to try to like do an IRS investigation into what these people earn. But I guess it was more of a philosophical question of proness. Because it's been a theme that we've been talking about in our long running series here that we have, the other 2 episodes, as far as sort of what the nature of this whole sport is, and because I agree with you when you say it's like the most blurred one, and I thought maybe you're somebody who could have some insight on that.
I like to think of myself as a professional enthusiast.
Well, I kind of think of myself like that. I don't think that we're in the same category, though.
Well, but I mean, that's the thing is like, yeah, we race in different races, but like the reality is and there seems to be not enough teams to create a professional class in cyclocross, at least in America. And even if you go to Europe, it's kind of the same story as there's like Telenet Fidea and Marlux and whatever Vanderpool's team is. I don't know how to pronounce it. There's like 4 or 5 big teams with a lot of budgets, and like you either ride for one of those teams and you make a living, or you're a privateer. And I'm pretty sure some of those guys make good money because there's start money in Europe and there's like more money in cyclocross in general. But if there was actual money in cyclocross, we'd see a lot more people doing it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You wouldn't see the cyclocross world champion immediately racing the spring classics doing well, and then all of the commentators saying, well, we'll never see him in a cross race again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I mean, in the US, it's like in general, the professional cycling market is a lot smaller with a lot less money. So it's like, people don't have those same options. But I would imagine that if, Hyde had an opportunity to go make triple his cross salary racing road bikes, he might consider doing that.
Probably would go do it. Yeah, right.
Because at a certain point, it's like you're a cyclist and, you come to a point in your life where you're like, well, I'm also an adult and I like have to save for like retirement and like, like there's real world things that start to happen. And like, you kind of have to do the thing that is going to make you more money.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so maybe you sort of answered it saying that you're a professional enthusiast. So
I guess if I had to pick one, I would say no, I'm not a professional cross racer.
Man, that's crazy.
And part of it is because like, even Richard, who runs the team, like we don't call it a professional cyclocross team. We're a cyclocross team, and we're a fully supported, well-funded cyclocross team, but we don't make the distinction of calling ourselves a professional cyclocross team. And I'm not really sure why he's made that distinction. It could have gone either way, but like at the same time, I think the reason is because, for him, it's a focus. Results are important, but they're not the most important thing for the team. The most important thing for the team is like the camaraderie and like togetherness of the team.
There's
and racing our bikes.
There's a component of it maybe that is actually maybe a more valuable, no pun intended, a more valuable thing to look at than the money. If you're on a team where the results, now of course, if you're on like a Cat 4 team that's just a bunch of idiots and they really, really are insistent about results, so then it doesn't count. But once you rise to the level of that elite rank, teams where the results really matter, where the sponsors are really demanding that, the team managers are really looking at it, I suppose that could be an element of proness, so to speak. If you're on a team where it's mostly about getting rad and not a whole lot of money involved ultimately in any of it, so one way or another, it's not that much of a distinction. That's an interesting observation. Yeah. So just Richard's approach and your team's approach is not to be out there, hammering the nail as to you better get on the podium,
I mean, also if you think about it more pragmatically, it's just a not sustainable approach. It's like 60 guys will start a cross race, only one is going to win, and realistically only 3 guys on a given day have a chance. You know, if you think about the US this year, you know, there's been more of a kind of like, you know, is it going to be Tobin? Is it going to be Hyde? Maybe Powers is going to finally be back. But like, you know, you go back a few years and, you know, even like 2 seasons ago is like,
I mean,
who's going to win the race? Is Jeremy Powers racing? He's going to win the race.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or the same thing in Europe. It's like if you do your calculations of as a sponsor on like your return of investment being like how many races you win, well, you know, then you basically have to sponsor Matthew Vanderpool. You know, that's your only option.
That's your only option.
So at a certain point as a sponsor, you kind of have to focus on telling more than just that one story, because every race there's 100 stories to tell, and you just kind of have to focus on other things basically.
Well, thankfully at the end of the season though, sports have started doing, they showed the race for like 3rd place. Since 1st and 2nd were locked up, it was like you had the battle for who was the last step on the podium, and that was what was getting all the TV time.
Yeah, and it was super interesting. And I mean, and then on the other hand, there's also like the women's racing has been amazing all season. You know, it's just
that's absolutely true.
Been so good, and it's like, you know, and I think of it kind of in this way about women's racing in general is it's like it's a really undervalued market for both like sponsorship and promoters, because it's like in general I think the amount of male racers there are for promoters to bring to a bike race has kind of been maxed out, but we haven't really even begun to tap how many women want to race bikes, in my opinion, because like we haven't created the opportunities, and we haven't like marketed to cycling to them in a way that's appealing, you know? So I think it's like, if you're trying to create growth, women's cycling is where you want to do it. And if you're trying to like get into sponsoring a team, like women's cycling is it, you know, it's like you can get in on the ground floor of building like a big team for a lot less money than you would be trying to build like a world tour men's team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's something that we've actually picked up on in organizing the local races up here, and we're starting to push for that. We're actually potentially, this is sort of breaking news if I reveal it all, but we're talking about actually cutting down some of the men's race categories that USA Cycling and I think a logical decision. This is not a criticism of USA Cycling, but it does have an effect on like a local race where you're drawing 200 to 250 people.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many categories and so many age groups that USA Cycling says they would like to see you run, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a 200-person race, you end up with a lot of fields that have 5 people in them, 8 people in them, you know?
Yeah.
The women's races, though, we're not drawing, if you draw 200 people to a race, you draw 185 men and 15 women.
Right.
And we've looked at that and said, well, look, the men that we're drawing the same men over and over and over again. It's the same people. And I think you would see that. You're racing a much wider spectrum of races than like our local races. But
sure,
you sort of see the same people year in and year out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even at the top level, it's the same people over and over again.
And over a decade, there's some shuffling and some shifts. And, you see, say Tim Johnson sort of coming through in his career, sort of moving into a retirement mode. Now we've actually seen, it sounds like Jeremy is starting to get into that situation where Powers is contemplating, the next step in his career. He's not looking at it in the same way that he was, say, 5 years ago. That happens even at the amateur ranks, but it goes on for much longer because you have Masters Racing and you have a guy who was a lifetime Cat 4 and now he's going to be a Masters racer, and for 30 years that guy is there, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's great. He's guys like that are the reason why basically racing exists in the US, and
you're absolutely right. It's spectacular.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time it's like there's not, it's like that guy wants to race pretty much no matter what.
Exactly.
You know, like you can put him in a slightly different category that makes space elsewhere in the schedule. And like maybe they'll be a little grumpy about it and maybe they'll whine a little bit, but chances are they're still going to race because they love racing.
Unless it's the single speed.
Right. That's not a category, that's an equipment choice.
Yes. Yes. Dan, this is really a very this is a very exciting conversation for me to have, because it's like you've been in our Nycross Slack chat for 6 months, but you haven't been. You're just saying all the stuff we're always just saying, right?
I mean, you guys, you know, it's like I don't want to make you guys not feel special, but at the same time, like race promotion is kind of the same everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know that. I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel.
And I talk to a lot of race promoters, and I talk to a lot of people that are like fed up with a lot of people's bullshit.
Awesome. You're giving me some confidence, because I've been, you know, I mean, look, my day-to-day life is a little more stressful than cyclocross race promotion. Nonetheless, the relative level of anxiety that I'm having over sort of shifting these things around and making these changes is such that I'm like nervous to do it. I'm afraid that there'll be like a social media blowback when I announce that, you know, the Masters categories are slightly different than they were last year, and that's going to be done to accommodate a women's program that would hopefully help grow women's cycling at the Cat 4 and Cat 5 levels to introduce more women to racing. I expect that some people will say it's ridiculous that the Masters race is now at 9 a.m. maybe, and a women's race is at a time slot that would have been previously considered a good time slot, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, like, here's the thing. What's a good time slot? You know, like it depends on your priorities, right? For a lot of guys I know, it's like racing at 9 is great because they can get home before noon.
Get
and
home
they have
and
like
be home with your kid before it's too late in the day. Absolutely.
Right. And yes, I don't know. Sometimes it sucks racing at like 3, you know, because you're 6 hours away from where you live or something like that, you know? And the thing about, you know, I feel like races are kind of have been toying with this for a few years now, like putting the Cat 3s as the last race of the day, whatnot. And it's like, the reality is like the elite field really could not care less. It's like most people racing in the elite race are going to come and race at whatever time you say the elite race is, because that's just what they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not... if you're racing at an elite level or at some kind of high level, you've already made so many sacrifices to be there that it's not going to make or break it for you if you have to be there 2 hours early.
Yeah, you're not skipping the race because you don't like the 1 o'clock start time.
Yeah, you've already skipped like how many social occasions or like parties or, you know, missed events, you know, so you could train, or like got up early or you know, whatever. It's like you've already made all these sacrifices. It's like it's not going to factor into the calculus at this point.
You know, that probably translates in large part across the board. I don't know that only applies to elite racers. It applies in the most bold sense, you know, bold letters to the elites, because they're the ones making the most sacrifices as in large part, by definition.
Sure.
But yeah, I suppose there's probably some guy out there who's Cat 5 who's trying to make it, who's living that life also. But, you know, I think that's a logic that applies to everyone. You're not gonna do the training it takes even to just be a competitive Cat 3 rider, and then just not go to the races because you preferred last season's start time, right? Nobody would do that. Here's the thing that I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Do you remember when? Now I'm going to do like the history bro back for a second. Do you remember when you called me to tell me that you weren't going to race on Nycross after you had raced on Nycross for a year? You can say no. It's almost better
honestly,
if you don't.
I honestly do not remember. And
okay.
This is a thing that you're not the only person to probably be annoyed with me about, but I have like a really bad memory.
Yeah, no. It's even better. Then this is great, because this is the conversation that we had. And here's why I remember it. It doesn't shock me that you don't remember. It's because in the time that we've run our Nycross team, you're the only person who's been like an elite, legit male racer who scored UCI points on our team and then gone and gotten on like a more famous team or a bigger team, right?
Uh-huh.
Actually, a smaller team, but a more legit team. A very well funded team, as you call it, a non-professional, very well funded team. I was actually in court. This is my perspective, right? I don't have any idea where you were. I was in court and my phone rings and it's you, and I was like, it's like a little weird that you were calling me because it was like sort of the off season and like a random Tuesday or something. And I was like, I better see why he's calling me. Something could be up, I guess. So I pick up the phone, and you're your normal, very polite and cordial self. We like talk for 2 seconds, and you're like, yeah. So I got to tell you, I've really been nervous to call you and tell you, but I got an offer to ride on another team, and I really enjoyed being on Nycross, but I'm going to take this other offer. And then I said, well, Dan, I mean, our resources, so the odds are probably that if you have an offer from like a more legit team, it's probably a better offer, but why don't you just tell me about it and maybe we can come up with something that'll work really well and you would want to stay on our team ultimately. And then all you said was, it's Richard Sachs. And then I said, that's the greatest news I've ever heard. Congratulations. And I just gave up immediately. I was like, yeah, my offer of driving you to a race and not making you sleep on the floor so my dog can sleep in the bed with me. I won't do that anymore. That was going to be my offer.
It's a hard offer to beat because the thing with Richie is like so much of what being on that team is just like uncategorized cachet, right?
I mean, it seems like there's nobody cooler. It's certainly not in U.S. cycling than Richie, right? That's my perspective. He seems like he's the coolest dude around. I mean that legitimately. I don't say that with any kind of hint of sarcasm or anything. He seems awesome, right?
Yeah, he's a lot better off the internet than he is on the internet. I'll also say that.
I mean, I only know him. You know him really well. I know him like a little bit off the internet and mostly on the internet, right?
His inside jokes are just as incomprehensible off the internet as they are on the internet. So I'll just, full disclosure.
So you're like about as inside as somebody could be with the Richard Sachs cyclocross team, and you're telling me that there's still inside jokes that you don't get. That's a level of inside jokery that is fantastic.
I mean, it's to the point where we're adding a few young guys to the team next year, and one of them is Michael Owens, who's like 20, a super talented kid, like way more talented than I was when I was 20. And me and him like message through Facebook, whatnot. So, he finally got the offer from Richie. He said yes, and I was talking to him and I was like, listen, if you ever have a question about something that Richie is saying, or you don't understand what the hell he's talking about and he's not explaining it to you, just like give me a call and I can probably make it make sense for you.
You're like the Sachs translator.
Because this is like this is literally a thing that like I've gone through, like when I was joining the team and like when I was kind of navigating, I've been on that team for like 6 or 7 years now. So it's like, I kind of know all of Richie's little quirks and mannerisms and like phrases. But when I was joining the team, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like it was basically like, what is this guy talking about? But I feel too intimidated to be like, yo, what are you talking about, man?
So I mean, you've reached a point where you're not like a young up and comer at this point at all. Do you contemplate that? Do you still go out there and think to yourself, well, here I am, and I'm still new at this? Or do you not have that going through your head at all? Do you go out there going, all right, I am a seasoned elite racer, let's bang it out?
I mean, I definitely know that I'm not new at this anymore. And people don't treat me like that anymore. There was definitely like, I'd say probably even as recently as like 2015, I think people still kind of saw me as a as a new kid on the block type of thing. And so, maybe part of that might've been my own impressions, but like at this point, I've been doing the same kind of UCI race program for a few years now, and it's I go to the same races.
Help me break this down. So what was the year that you were on Nycross? Was that 2010?
Yes.
Okay, so now it's 2000. So we're going on 2018. So this is going to be your 8th season racing a UCI elite schedule, basically, right?
Yep. And
you think it took all the way till 15 before you kind of were established at a level of being a guy who people thought was gonna. I mean, what do you mean when you say that? Is this from like a result, like a race result,
it's definitely not even race results. It's definitely more just like I know pretty much everybody I'm racing against on a first name basis, and they know me, and there's like a respect there, kind of.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's people talk about that those scenarios where I was listening to Adam Meyerson's podcast a few weeks ago, and he was just recalling a story about racing at Gloucester one year, and Tim Johnson in his prime had flatted and was coming back through the field after having gotten to the pit, and Adam latched on to his wheel and sort of had one of Adam's like rides of his life where he stuck with him the whole way, and you should listen to Adam's podcast for the story. But the long story short was that Adam and Tim ended up duking it out. And at the end, I guess there was, Adam relayed that there was like maybe a feeling that maybe Adam should have different respect for Tim and maybe he shouldn't have sprinted him or something like that. Tim was chasing points for going to Worlds or something. And I only relay this story because I'm thinking about, the idea of like the respect within the race. So you show up in 2010 and you're on this local club amateur team and nobody knows who you are, and nobody's certainly getting out of your way saying don't sprint that guy, right? You're the guy getting sprinted every time at the line, I would think, right? Hopefully winning some of those sprints, but nobody's coming through going up. I'm riding for 10th, but Chabanov's right behind me and he needs those points because he's trying to get on the start line at Worlds in a better position. Let him go by, right?
No, that definitely never happened.
And now maybe that still doesn't happen. I think that's got to be somewhat unique. That's probably got to be unique to the top racers.
Yeah, absolutely not. Things like that don't happen, but it's honestly just it's like people. It's more of a general sense of like, this is going to sound kind of douchey, but like people kind of know who I am.
Yeah, right. No, I get that.
And so there's, it's like I get to have more of an opinion because of that. So it's like, if we're riding in a group, I feel more able to like point things out that people are doing that's kind of stupid,
You're talking about just like a group ride. You're not talking about a group in a race.
In a race. I'm talking about
really?
Yeah, absolutely. Like especially.
So maybe without naming any names, give me an example of a time you would do something like that.
Just there, for instance, like DCCX, it's like a notoriously fast group race, or even like a race like Nittany, also like notoriously fast group racing. I think one year at Nittany, like going into the last lap on day 2, we had a lead group of 12 in the UCI race.
Yeah, it's a big group.
It's ridiculous. It was basically a peloton. And actually at this race, it was like the top 3 guys in the group were kind of like having an easy time of it. And everybody was trying to kind of like sit like 4th or 5th. So it was like really brutal behind that group. Like people were chopping each other and people were like brake checking each other. And at a certain point I was like, guys, if you want to ride hard, go to the front and ride hard and this will all stop. But if you want to sit back here and ride easy, then chill out. Otherwise you're just wasting energy. Like you're making it harder for yourselves to sit on wheels riding like this. Just chill out.
Stop chopping me, hold the wheel, and we'll all just drag race it at the end.
Yeah, or like if you have all this excess energy, just go to the front and make it harder. Try and ride everybody off the wheel. It's like there's like a constructive use of your energy and there's a stupid use of your energy. And right now you're all using your energy stupidly. And here's the thing. It's not like anybody listened to me and did anything differently.
That's probably true, right?
Because it's racing. You can yell at guys all you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get heard. But at the same time, it was kind of like I saw all these people in the group that hadn't been racing as long as I have and felt the need to say something.
And you were in a position where you could tell them something, and whether they're going to listen or not, you're right. That you're giving them advice that should be listened to.
Right. And maybe at some point, in 2 years, they'll be in the same position and they'll like realize that, oh, that guy that was yelling at me at Nittany in like 2015 was totally right. Or maybe not. And maybe they're just never going to be in that position again. I don't know.
Okay. So you've reached a point though where you're maybe not exactly the old man of the peloton, but I'm
certainly not Adam.
Elder statesman.
I don't think he's there yet. I don't think he's an elder statesman because that's like, Meyerson is like the elder statesman. I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I meant by Adam. Sorry.
Yeah. I know who you meant when you said Adam. I didn't think you were talking about the guy from Girls. Maybe that's it. Actually, do you remember now? I'm sure you don't remember any of this. You shouldn't. When we went to, it must have been because we didn't go to like all that many races where we went like specifically together, but I think we went to the old Williston, Vermont UCI race.
Yeah, that's the one where I had to sleep on the floor because your dog needed to sleep in the bed.
No, that was a much better time. That was Gloucester.
Was this Barkley or was this a previous dog?
It was Barkley. I had just gotten Barkley like that. So now, not that anyone's tuning in.
Either way, I remember sleeping on the floor. It doesn't really matter.
We went to Williston, and I think like we all slept on the floor because we'd rented some like lake house from some dude that was like my father's old business like associate, and he just told me it was like a lake. It was like a nice place on the lake, but it was completely like an insanely rustic cabin. Do you remember doing that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And then we were going to the race, and I think you'd raced Nittany, so Nittany was your first. I think Nittany was your first UCI cyclocross race that season, right? I don't think you'd done any before that.
That's where I knocked out one of my front
your tooth, right? Oh God, you had like a really like a flash bang good start to being an elite cyclocross racer. You knocked out your tooth. You slept on the floor a bunch. You paid your dues. When we went to that race, I told you that if you could, you should try to ride in whatever group Adam Meyerson was in, because I thought that he was someone who, if you just rode near him, people would know who he is, and then they might notice that you were also there. Like you could literally like end up in a picture because you were like next to Adam Meyerson by mistake. Do you remember that I told you to use that strategy?
No, I probably failed at using it anyway.
No, you did. That was the best part about it. Was like, I think on day 2, I know we can go back and dig into cross results and find out, but I'm pretty sure on day 2 you
way ahead of you, buddy,
finished right next to him in just like you're kind of describing, like a kind of a big group. It wasn't like a big group of 12, but it was maybe like the second group in the race, and it was like 5 or 6 people all at once coming into the line, and you were in the group with Meyerson, and I was so excited because I was hoping that someone would just take a picture of Adam and then put it on social media, and Nycross would just appear right behind him or right in front of him. I don't remember what the arrangement was. Now that sort of shifted around. Now you're that guy that people know who they are. That if they're riding, if there's a new, I'm sure you've heard the phrase scrub zone, right? You know about that whole concept,
I know
right?
all about the scrub zone. That got started when I was still in the scrub zone.
Right, exactly. So there's some dude who's in the scrub zone who's going to have the ride of his life this season, and they have one result where he was like in the group with you, but he finished like 9 spots back ultimately. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You're maybe. Adam is essentially irreplaceable in U.S. cyclocross because he's pretty much he's like the cornerstone of it, right? But you're getting maybe to that point where you're like one of these cornerstone guys. Is that reasonable? Is that possible?
I think it's a little, I think that's a little too much, I'd say.
Not there yet?
No, definitely not there yet. And I don't know if I'll honestly ever get there, simply because I think one of the reasons why Adam is such a cornerstone is because, it's not just that he's been in the sport for so long, but it's also because he's done so much for it.
He's done so much for it, absolutely.
And I have yet to do anything for the sport, really.
That's an astute observation.
Other than participate in it for a long time and write about it and et cetera, but not, I haven't put on a race. The most I've done is I helped tear down a course at Rainy Park this year. You know what I mean? And it's because my friends were putting that race on.
Sure. Well, here, I got
ways to go.
I'm going to give you a radical suggestion. I think what you're doing at this point is about the most important type of stuff that somebody can do for it. Because practically speaking, we don't need more races. I'm of the opinion that we need fewer races. I'm not going to be the person who sacrifices my race to that goal. I understand promoters aren't going to do that. But I don't think we need any more races. You don't need to go out and run a race. If you want to take the load off of a promoter and say, I want to help you, I'll do half the stuff you need to have done, that's a different story. But I think writing about the races, getting it into media coverage that, even if it's still, niche cycling related coverage, it advances the sport in a way. And you're conscious of the fact that women's racing is the more interesting racing. It's more competitive. You're conscious of the fact that this is not something that is done on a $20 billion budget like the Super Bowl. I mean, you get the way. I don't mean to be like, Dan, you're the greatest guy ever, but you get how the system is because you've been in it a long time. Right. And the stuff you write about it, I think, is as helpful at this stage of U.S. cyclocross's evolution as it would be for you to say, you know what I'm going to do on an off weekend? I'm going to go out and run a local race that's going to draw in 120 people and just be a little local race, right?
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think you're right. We really don't need more races. At this point, the races that we have are it's too much.
I mean, what is there? Last year I think there was 44 UCI races in the United States, something like that.
Something crazy. I mean,
that's a lot. I mean, that's 44 2 race weekends, so it's 22 weekends or whatever. But that's a lot. That's one every weekend with a bunch of weekends where there was 2. There was a couple of weekends where there was 3.
I think they fixed that this year. In 2016, there was definitely several weekends where there was 3 UCI races going on, and often they were, 2 of them were within 6 hours of each other, which was bad.
Yeah, and the pool gets just split in half, right? Because people decide to gamble, they're going to points chase, and they go to one or the other.
I mean, it helps guys like me.
What's your odds of scoring UCI points on a given Sunday now? Say, you roll up to the line, and it depends on who's there, right? We just like we're talking about. If Steven is there, we know Steven's going to win, essentially, right? If Carey is there, it's going to be Carey or Steven.
It does depend on who's there, but it's also, this is funny. It's 2017, the 7th year racing UCI. It was my best year ever in terms of UCI points. It was the most points I've ever scored. I've scored more often than any other season. And I did the same exact race schedule that I've always done.
Yeah, so it's not like you went to the race in Oklahoma hoping that no one would show up and got some extra points.
Right. And it was even better considering that Nittany was not a UCI race this year. And that's a race that's local to me that has a good draw, but typically I can sneak into the top 10 at, and then it's also doing it's also taking into effect that the first 3 of the first weekends of the season are all C1s, US Cup weekends.
Yeah, where the field is just mega stacked, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The points go a little deeper in a C1 though, too, right? They go to 15.
They go to 15.
Which I mean is not. It's probably. I mean, it's deeper, but it's probably effectively actually still not easier, you know?
No, I mean, I actually did sneak into C1 points at Charm City, and that was probably like the hardest thing ever.
What did you finish at Charm City? I don't remember.
I had a 14th on the C1 day. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question. So I had a theory that I sort of presented last episode, which was in large part bogus, and I probably didn't clarify exactly what I meant enough. But I'd said that based on looking at cross results, Stephen Hyde's winning the 2017, last year's national championship, not the most recent one that he won.
Mm-hmm.
His points on cross results were worse. He actually went down or went up, however you want to look at it. His ranking was worse after he won nationals than the points cross results attributed to him when he finished 19th in some post worlds Belgian race that super legit guys were at. It was, I think, the last trophy race or whatever it's called, the BP Bank Trophy, I think is what the series is. And I suggested that maybe it was telling the not so much ultimately. So I didn't get this out last time. Not so much ultimately that it was easier for Stephen to win nationals. I'm sure it was harder as a physical effort to win nationals than it was to get 20th in a post worlds Belgian series race. But that the quality of the race was such that outside maybe the top 5 or top 10 riders, the Belgian race has more skilled riders in it, and that's why he gets better points for doing the Belgian race. That's how cross results works, right? It looks at the other riders around you when you're racing. It doesn't just say what your result was. So no.
So for national championships 2017, he scored 142 points. His next week or 2 weeks later at Hoogerheide, he was 27th and got 139 points. So 3 points better.
Exactly.
For 27th versus
for 27th versus first.
I'll also weigh in that sometimes the the perceived exertion of doing the finishing in the 20s is a lot higher than when you're winning a race, because you have a lot of adrenaline when you're winning, and it's often easier to dig deeper when you're digging for the win.
Oh, so you're actually thinking that it's, at least from a perceived okay, so you said, what made me think of this is you just said that...
Put it this way, when you're getting dropped, it's the most painful thing ever. You could be not going as hard. It feels awful.
Right.
Versus when you're attacking for the win, you're probably going harder, but it feels awesome.
So riding for 14th in the C1 at Charm City, that's the hardest effort that you think you've made, or that is among them?
Definitely among them. I mean, compare that to like races that I won this year, which were all local races. It's like definitely trying to, hang on to some guys that are way stronger than me at Charm City. And that was also a day where it was just like 90 degrees and humid.
So it's a hard day to begin with, like that's one of the things that we glaze over a lot when we're talking just about, it's easy to talk about cross results and look at the rankings, look at numbers and say, well, he got this here and he got that there. This one must have been harder. But of course, you got to know that 90 and humid, it's going to be a harder effort, even if you finish last and you get the 80% rule, right?
Yeah. I mean, the guys I was chasing that day, it was like Cooper Wilsley, who went to Worlds, Michael Vanderham, who went to Worlds, Driscoll, Tristan Cowie, who also went to Worlds, Spencer Petrov, Kerry Warner, and the guy that was behind me was Bjorn Sealander, who rode freaking World Tour.
Yeah, right. Wait, what's that guy doing? I didn't even know that he's like a pro roadie, I thought.
Well, no, I think he quit, or he didn't get a contract on the road. So he was racing cross this past year. We saw him at a bunch of races.
Well, it's not exactly awesome, but it's kind of cool that happened for cross, not so much for Bjorn,
Yeah, it's definitely... it's probably a downgrade in terms of income level, but I'm sure he's having slightly more fun.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows that road racing is no fun. Do you do any road racing now? I mean, actually, you said you were to race this weekend up in New York, so you're still racing on the road, right?
Yeah, I did Grant's Tomb. There's a road race in Philly this weekend that I'm going to do. But my main focus in the summer is mountain bikes.
I was going to ask you about that actually. So you're racing mountain bikes primarily now is your summer gig.
Yeah, and part of it is I think one of the things that I really enjoy about cycling is kind of the progression of it.
What do you mean by that?
I just mean that, like, I think the seasons that I'm least happy with, at least in terms of cross, have been seasons where I felt like I didn't improve in any way, or neither my results improved nor did I kind of improve as a rider. Because obviously I've had years where, like, I knew that as a rider I was faster, stronger. I was a better rider overall, and I knew that I had improved, but my results didn't necessarily reflect it for whatever reasons, whether because the quality of the races improved or I just had bad luck. For me, it's always kind of been like the seasons that I was least happy with were just seasons where I didn't get that feeling of improvement. And I hadn't gotten that feeling for a long time racing road. And I had dabbled in mountain bikes. And a friend of mine who has like a small mountain bike team was just like, hey, whenever you want, like, come race for me. Like, I'll give you a bike, I'll give you some kit, we'll get you to some races. And so now,
is that the team you're racing on now, or what team is that?
Yeah, it's Ludwig and Larson Racing, and it's a buddy of mine who basically makes really fancy light fixtures. But the reason mountain biking has been so great is because almost every race I do, I feel like I'm progressing, and that's super rewarding as an athlete.
So you're at a point in mountain biking where you just are still on that uphill curve.
Yeah, I'm learning something almost every race.
So if you've got mountain biking, so you've got, your scenes, right? You've got your mountain bike scene, your cross scene, your road scene, right?
Uh-huh.
How much crossover do you see? How much do you see the same guy racing Grant's Tomb that's going to be at the mountain bike race that you'll also see at Gloucester or similar?
I would say there's a ton of crossover between road and cross. I saw a lot of cross racers that I'm friends with at Grant's Tomb. One of my mountain bike teammates was at the race as well. We raced together. And he also races cross. But in terms of I feel like mountain biking, particularly in the mid-Atlantic, is very isolated in the sense that, like, there is some crossover and some people dabble in other disciplines, but there's a lot of guys that, like, the only competitive cycling they do is they just race the Mid-Atlantic Super Series every summer, and that's it.
That's their racing, right?
That's their race. That's like what they've done for the last 20 years, and they're just going to keep doing it.
So, Mid-Atlantic Super Series is, so it's cross-country racing, obviously, so we should probably be clear about that, but it's cross-country racing, right?
I do cross-country. The series hosts several enduros, and there are endurance options with a lot of races and endurance-only events that are like 30 to 50-mile races.
That was going to be what my next question was just like distance. These aren't like World Cup style cross country races. This is 3 hours out there and in the woods.
No, no. There are some races where, like, a bad combination of decisions happens, and a 4-lap race becomes like a 2-hour race for the winner of the men's cross country, which means that for a lot of people, it's like a 3.5-hour race.
Yeah.
And that's like, they should have shortened the race by a lap, not this is the desired outcome that we're hoping for. Most races are an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes.
So when I was in college and for some time after college, I raced cross-country races, and I haven't raced a mountain bike race in a number of years now. I mean, really, in 15 years or something. But it was really the Wild West. It was like races could just be these crazy 50-mile loops. The categories were irrelevant. You'd sign up for whatever category you wanted to be in, but everyone would do the same crazy loop. There were some races that involved laps, and it was at the time when 24-hour racing was really the big thing to be doing. Everybody was trying to go for like the crazy long race, right?
Mm-hmm.
The shift now is towards races that are not long, an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of the idea.
Sure.
Do you think that I mean, that's got to be a way better fit. I would think that. So as a racer or somebody who's doing multiple different things and you're training, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but I would think the cross would be your focus, right? Like you're doing stuff with the plan to be ready for cross more than that. Like mountain biking is what you're going to go do, right?
I mean, to a certain extent, my season kind of like, I take time off after cross season, and I also take time off in like June, July. And so my cross season really like focuses after that summer break. That's when I'm like, I'll cross all the time. Like I'll put my road bike away and I'll start training on one of my cross bikes. I'll still keep racing mountain bikes because it's nice to get in intensity and it's easier to go to a race than to go do intervals.
That's an interesting perspective.
I mean, it's for me.
It's not easier to go to a race than it is to do intervals. The intervals you can just do out in your street.
I'm more motivated to go hard in a race than I am in my street. Put it
right
on. But after my winter break, like I'm basically training the same way that I would train for a road season. I'll do a endurance block, and then I'll do a threshold block, and then I'll do a VO2 block, and then I'll start racing, and basically just race mountain bikes kind of the same way that I raced road bikes when I was doing crits. And then basically just go until my summer break and refocus after that. So it's not, I don't necessarily for me, it's important to take a break from cross because it's such an intense season, and especially for me, it feels particularly so because it's like every weekend I'm driving somewhere very far. I feel like I don't have a lot of time at home. Like it feels like those fall months are very, very busy and very stressful for me. Whereas like during the summer, most of the mountain bike races are like an hour to 90 minutes away. Like I go there for an afternoon, I race my bike, I come back. Like it's a lot more relaxed.
You're sleeping in your own bed 7 days a week during mountain bike season.
Yeah, it's just a lot more relaxed. I like don't have to. I feel like it's important for me to just kind of like forget about cyclocross for a little bit, and that allows me to. I feel like it allows me to bring like a very a lot more enthusiasm and just like a fresh approach to the fall when I get there.
Yeah, versus somebody who's declared that they're a cross specialist and they're just planning for cross all year round. That's not a model you're applying.
No, and honestly, like as someone who has raced cross for like 8 years at an elite level, and someone who also coaches athletes.
I was just going to ask you about that because you used a bunch of very not very, very technical terms. You said that you did an endurance block and then a threshold block and then a VO max block. And I said, I was thinking so much, Dan, you sound like you maybe know about training. Do you have a coaching business?
I do. Actually right now I work for, I coach clients for a guy that coaches me, but I'm like, kind of working on a website and just I'm gonna break away on my own kind of not because I don't enjoy working with Tim from Point Way Performance, but mostly because I just want to have like some creative control.
that blasted creative control. I don't want the website to be blue, I want it to be green. I have to have my own business now. Basically.
Well, I mean, that's the nice thing about a coaching business is like, if you want, you can just do it. But
Yeah, right.
what I was going to say is, like, as coming from that perspective of a coach and an elite racer, I don't know what you would be doing that would be cross specific in March.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, the reality is like an endurance athlete, like, you don't want to, it's like you don't really want to take a huge amount of time off. Like, you can't just like take the entire winter off.
Oops.
Like, if you don't want to race bikes in the spring, that's fine, but you want to go and like you want to like run and ski and hike. You want to be active in some way.
So my approach of not having done any exercise in approximately 5 years is not going to be the way to go, is what you're telling me? I'm not just really well rested now?
Yeah, there's a point of diminishing returns on rest, unfortunately.
Dan, I have another question for you.
Yeah, what's up?
Which maybe we can actually have as a discussion for a minute or two. So another thing that we've been talking about, and now I don't feel bad that I've been refreshing sort of what we've talked about in the past, because I know you haven't listened to the other podcasts now, is this sort of angle about the races, and you experienced this. We talked about the scrub zone. The real professional pros, of which you said there's maybe 10. I think there's maybe 3 or 4, counting men and women together. Maybe there's 10, but in your race, when you're racing, there's a couple guys who are real pros. Then there's a lot of people who are sort of glorified versions of Cat 3s. They're serious. They take it very seriously, but they have a 40-hour-a-week day job or more, and they're not out there in any way that's ultimately beyond what, let's say a Cat 3 who's racing local races is, right?
Sure.
What do we need to do? What do you think we need to do to improve the scene with the things that I perceive as sort of the routes you can go is get more people through the turnstiles, group participation, numbers go up, more people is better. That's one theme. The other one is sort of, we talked about this a little bit, the idea that maybe more races isn't necessarily better. And it goes with racers too. Maybe not having a, well, I'll give you an example that's sort of already one that's been solved, but an elite national championships that basically anybody could enter. That used to be the way it worked, right?
Yeah.
And then at some point they said, actually, we're going to make it so that you have to have a UCI point. What are the qualifications to get into nationals now? Do you know off the top of your head?
You just have to have a UCI point or be ranked top 90 in the Pro CX, or you can petition. I mean,
I knew there was like some quote loopholes. There were some ways to go do it.
Yeah, it's essentially they like made register. Anyone can still do nationals, as far as I can tell. They basically made it an extra step where you have to like sit down and write an email explaining why you should be able to do nationals. Yeah. And I haven't heard of anyone who has petitioned who has been declined. And I think it's because, like, for the most part, if you're sitting down to write that email, there's a good reason for, at least in your mind, that you can articulate for why you should do nationals, and so it's better than just because. That
step is effectively causing some self-selection. That if nationals comes to Albany, New York, and I'm free that weekend, I'm not going to just go pay the fee so it can be cool that I line up on the grid with the pros, right?
Yeah, I think the self-selection. I think that it is a lot of self-selection. I think. Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's not like they're explicitly saying on the website somewhere, like, if you petition, we'll probably let you in. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like wink. Right. This is anecdotal evidence on my part from people that I know who have petitioned, who have all gotten in.
Yeah, and you haven't heard of anybody yourself who has been told no.
Right. But I assume, like, if someone petitioned, like, fairly egregiously, they would be like, actually,
Mark,
no.
Me, for example. Yes.
Mark, maybe we should play rock, paper, scissors to decide who has to do it. But obviously our test that we now have to conduct is you and I. Maybe we'll just both do it. We have to petition to see if we can be allowed to race nationals.
Oh, Gary.
I mean, let me know how that goes. I'd be curious, but
we'll have like a a version 2 of this podcast a year from now where we'll discuss what happens, or you'll just see me at nationals.
The guy who's so does that mean you're gonna not request your downgrade?
Yeah. What category do you have to be to race nationals?
I think you have to be a 2.
No, I can't do it then. I'm too low. See, that is to some degree should be the selection criteria right there. If you're a cat, I maybe not, but if you're a Cat 2 cyclocross racer, you're legit enough to race nationals, probably, right?
What?
No. Well, are you? I
don't know.
You're Cat 1, right?
Here's the thing. Again, yeah, categories like cyclocross and mountain bikes, like categories again, don't mean a whole lot.
I forget it.
Especially on the UCI level.
Yeah, sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
as soon as you said that, I thought about it. Yeah.
Right. You can buy a UCI license as a Cat 3. You can have UCI points as a Cat 3. In theory.
Yeah. But so then, if you're a UCI,
definitely some women I've heard that have, that just they upgrade to Cat 3 and like, all right, well, the next race that I can do is a UCI race. So I guess I'm going to buy a UCI license. You know what I mean? Like, it's just because there's fewer women's racing opportunities. A lot of times it's either like a true beginner's race or the UCI professional race.
I mean, that's a major problem in women's cycling, actually. It's
huge. I mean, it's worse here in the Pennsylvania area. The PACX series and the NJCX series both have one time slot for women in the entire race schedule.
Yeah, that's not
good. And basically it's a staggered start of 1, 2, 3s and I think 3, 4, 5s. And so essentially if you're a first time racer, you're lining up at the same time as Laura Van Gilder, who is just going to lap you and pull you from the race.
And that's going to be lap traffic for her.
Right. And and think about it this way, in terms of rider retention, if that's your first race experience,
you're not coming back.
The chances of you being like, oh, that was a lot of fun, I'm going to do that again, are very small.
Very low. Right.
You have to be somebody that like really enjoys suffering, kind of.
So here's the thing that we're talking about doing at Nycross. We are going to move. So one of the things I always see is just like you said, races have either just one field for women, or they have maybe a 1, 2, 3 field, or just an open race, a race any women can enter. Mm-hmm. And then if they have a beginner category, also that beginner category is at like 8:00 in the morning. Right. And that also, I think, affects that I had a fun time and I want to come back and do this, right? Because you're there, to be registered and everything, you had to leave your house. Even if it's a local race, you're leaving your house at 4:30 in the morning, 5:00 in the morning, right? You're leaving your house at 5. You're maybe getting up at 4 in the morning to get to this race,
right?
To do this thing you've never done before that somebody can convince you to come try, right?
Yeah, so, I definitely think it's a bad idea to put beginner fields at the beginning of the day. Like, I understand the impulse just because you want to give other people a better start time, but at the same time, it also that
hurts retention.
It has to hurt rider retention. Yeah. It just has to. There's no way that it can't.
I mean,
if you're giving the beginners the worst experience of the day, of course it's going to hurt rider retention.
My biggest incentive for catting up from a 4 to a 3 is so I don't have to be at a NECX race at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
That was my primary motivation also.
I'm pretty sure that's everybody's.
So we're going to do, I think you're right, actually. We're going to do this novel thing. We're going to have the women's 4-5 race at Nycross races go off at 11 a.m.
And that sounds like a very reasonable start time.
We're going to take advantage a little bit of the fact that we think that some of the folks who've been supporting our series and supporting racing in general for 10 to 20 years, they'll still come. They'll just have to race at 10 or 9 instead of at, 11 or 10.
Honestly, the difference between racing at 10 and 11 is not that big of a deal, and hopefully they'll just get over it.
Right.
I'm still in favor of putting the men's 4 or 5 race at the beginning of the day, because again, that's a really, for promoters, it's typically a category that has a lot of interest. And again, it's a segment of the population that's going to come race kind of no matter what.
You hope, right? For sure.
Right. For the most part. In my experience, like most races will sell out the 4 or 5 race, and it seems to not matter that it's at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, if you're trying to encourage more people from a different demographic, perhaps not putting them at the beginning of the day will help. So hopefully, that does work out for you guys. I'd love to hear about it.
Well, if you'll have to listen to some of our podcasts to find out. So all right, 4 or 5 women, 11 o'clock in the morning. You think this is a good idea, folks? You heard it here first. Dan Chabanov says, "Well, women in the afternoon."
Well, here's what I'll say about that, and this is, the real answer to that question is you should probably have a woman on your podcast to ask her.
That is a great. Right? That's a great answer, and you should definitely tune into our next podcast. That's a very good point, and I don't think we should glaze over that. Actually, this is a sport that is dominated by men, for one reason or another, and I don't know the reason. Probably because it's some of the things we've talked about tonight. Structurally, it's set up in a way that women's experience doing this is typically horrible. It's the type of thing I wouldn't want to do if I was exposed to it the way women are exposed to it. But you're absolutely right. A bunch of guys sitting around talking about how to make women's cycling better is the only thing worse than that is a bunch of guys not talking about how to make women's cycling better. But we need some women to actually weigh in,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, if, truthfully, like if you put it out there that like you're interested in hearing from them, people will reach out. You know what I mean? And I'm sure there's plenty of female racers who race Nightcross who probably have things to say about it, and like, yeah.
So, Dan, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. You have a coaching business that you're getting up and running here in the near term, is what it sounds like. Is there a way that people would get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you about that?
Yeah, right now, the easiest way to get in touch with me is just find me on social media, either on Instagram or Twitter. Both are at Dan Chabanov. And right now, I'm still actually like deciding on the names of the coaching business, but I think I might have narrowed it down to Honest Cycle Coaching, but it's not final yet, so don't quote me on it.
So at Dan Chabanov on Twitter or Instagram, and maybe one day, Honest Cycling Coaching, but maybe not.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Amateur Hour CX. If you've liked these episodes, please consider supporting us on Patreon to offset production costs. You can find the link for that in the show notes. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mwalling. Eric pretends he's the show account, which you can follow at Amateur Hour CX on Twitter. Please make sure to subscribe in your podcast player so you get our next episode in a couple weeks. Thanks. See you then.
Do you remember that time I went to Birkenhof and forgot my shoes?
I do, yeah. How did you resolve that?
I don't know. We borrowed shoes from somebody. It was bad.